I spoke to the owner of the 75 Champ this morning, and he gave me the green light to do everything just right in this thing. So the first thing I want to do, I've already disconnected the pots. This tone pot they installed measures 1 meg, well, 834 kilo ohms. So that has been changed out as I suspected. The original 250 is long gone. The base pot, which is disconnected, measures 251.8, and the volume measures 1.027. So 1 meg pretty much precisely. And we're just going to start getting stuff removed so we can make everything better. I don't know how many bond mots or just regular mots I'll have to add as I go. It's just going to be a lot of disconnecting things with the intent of putting them back later. Some of the wire will be reused. Some of the wire might be changed out. Haven't decided whether to reuse it. I think I'm probably going to reuse the original wire, just shorten the lengths where necessary. Some things I will change, like they've got the grid stoppers for the input here on the board as opposed to mounted on the jack, like they are on almost every other 60s Fender. And I have found in a lot of champs that this builds up DC at the input jack from leakage in the board. And while I can usually remove it by cleaning things, it's often best just to remove these from the board entirely, mount them at the jack. If it works for a twin reverb, it should work for a champ, right? And when it comes to a 75 champ, I'm a little less concerned with originality in what Leo did, because this was very much a student budget model. And by 75, it got even less care than the 60s versions. This was a rushed thing to get out the door for a cheap price. Doesn't mean it can't sound great, but originality is a little bit less of a concern, for me at least. See if I can get this out without burning anything. Replaced output transformer and non-original speaker jack. Really amazingly crappy solder joints and all the work that was done by the previous tech. I'm not going to call them a tech. They were hobbyists and they meant well. Bless their heart. Bless their heart indeed. As I've mentioned before in many of these things, especially like that rusted out basement teardown, if you don't know exactly where everything goes, don't blindly remove things the way you see me doing here. Take lots of pictures, make drawings, make notes to yourself, whatever you need to do. You can even put labels on things, but if you put labels in the app, get some painter's tape, low-tack painter's tape that won't leave a residue, and write on that. Don't write on the chassis or the board or anything. I see that done way too often. Let's see. Some of these parts will get reused. Some, like these 1 watt carbon comps used as droppers, will probably not, if I can get it to pick up. This is the 2 watt for the cathode bias out of the output tube, 6V6. Badly connected ground. Badly connected ground. I'll be redoing these a bit better. These 70s connections just have an afterthought. We can do much better, so we will. Let's see, I think everything should lift out on the board now. Let's see, did I miss anything there? No. Groovy, groovy. All right, this is going to be mostly a real-time video, but I think I will edit out some places where I have to move the camera and change the setup. Just wasted time in the video. And again, I know where all this will go. So I'm not going to have to draw this out. Like I mentioned, those grid stoppers, I will point things out to you as I come to them that I think people need to specifically know. That was tack soldered in there. They took that out poorly to begin with. Maybe they removed it and put it back. As I mentioned to the owner this morning when we spoke, sorry for the radio silence. I never quite know what to say just when I'm kind of talking just to fill space in these videos. Pardon me. Anyway, I was talking to the owner this morning and he asked, well, how much longer will it take to do all that stuff you're talking about, getting things just right and cleaning up the board? And I said, well, if this were, a super reverb or something like that, let alone that concert with the harmonic trim last couple weeks ago, that'd be a lot. But on a champ, not even a vibro champ, just a champ, it's really not adding much time, hence not adding much cost. And so you get a disproportionate return on your investment. It doesn't take a lot more money to do it right on a champ like this, but then you get the sound of an amp with no issues whatsoever. So I guess another way to look at it is you can do it the easy way and save a little bit of money on a champ, but then you'll always be living with things being not quite as nice as they might have been. And in answer to another question I got this morning about reusing original bus wire like this versus just replacing it, and isn't it faster to just replace it? It can be. In this case, it will be. If I did a video with that, say a 63 Deluxe, which is what that was, and I just started replacing all the bus wire, I guarantee you I get plenty of comments saying, well, why didn't you just leave the old bus wire? Bus wire doesn't wear out, does it? Sometimes it'll be corroded or whatever, and I will have to, but most of the time I can reuse it. So when possible, on a 60s original, I'll keep it. Wax and yuck. I'm going to get all this excess wax off, solder off, but I'll tap it in the trash can off camera. You've seen me do this before. I'll do one more for those who didn't see the previous video where I show how to do this. I just heat up the eyelet and then tap it, and it all splatters out. You can see it's empty now. but this makes a big mess on my desk, so I'm going to do this right over the trash can. All right, that's a lot better. Now, I've talked about this in other videos. All this crunchy, crusty stuff here, that's old flux and dirt, and stuff gets up on the eyelet, builds up, and if I don't get that off, that'll embed itself into the new solder. And then we've got all this wax to deal with on the 70s board. This one's not as bad as some, but it's not our friend. The wax was installed by CBS, coated on the boards, everything pretty much dipped to keep moisture from getting out of the board, because the previous boards did not have the wax and they absorbed moisture, and the boards would warp. And you can see that this board has not warped as much as a lot of 60s examples. But what happens over time is that every time you turn on the amp, and forgive me for those of you who've heard this in other videos of mine, every time you turn on the amp, it gets warm inside there. And the wax heats up a little bit and gets soft. The longer you play, especially in the summer, the hotter it gets, the softer the wax gets. And any particulates that are in the air where the amp is used settle on as a layer on that hot, soft wax. And then as the amp is turned off and cools off, all the wax hardens again, trapping that layer of dirt and cigarette smoke and just general malaise in that wax. And you repeat that process for decades, and the wax absorbs enough contaminants from the air that it actually becomes conductive itself. Wax by itself is not a good conductor, but wax impregnated with enough stuff from the air often does become conductive. And especially on these boards where you can see here, there's wax here that's kind of merged with the wax here. It's more common on amps that have been reworked a lot. You end up getting big puddles of wax where this eyelet is joined to this eyelet just through conductivity. And you get really bad leakage in these things. And so I am breaking up this nasty old flux. I'm not scraping up the board. Flux breaks up pretty easily. Then I'll wash it all off. And then we're going to start dealing with the wax. Try to get an awful lot off. We're not concerned about getting all the wax off. Just the top filthy layers. We'll do both boards. See, that doesn't take very long to get to that point. And we'll probably do a little bit on this side once we're at a, can see what we're doing. I might change out paper towels because this one's really yucky. All that old vintage tone is going away. I'll just fold it over on itself now. All right, so first thing I want to do is get some isopropyl on here. Doesn't take a lot at this stage. We'll give it a good soaking in a little while. Tasty. All that brown stuff that's coming up onto this cloth is stuff that would be conductive. Stuff that we don't want in an amplifier in our insulator. Remember, this board material is supposed to be insulating. So, conductivity is not our friend. It has so much yuck. First layer was gone. I couldn't see what was remaining until the first layer was off. It's very common on the amps to have big puddles of wax beneath plate resistors and such too. So say if this is a plate resistor connection, say it was here and here, you'd have wax from here to here and here to here, which bridges them. So this one's not as bad as many. But now is a good time to get rid of it. And I know I'm repeating myself because I don't know what else to say while doing repetitive tasks like this. I'd ask you about football games and such, but I don't follow the sports ball. Sorry. I know that makes me an alien in many parts of the world, especially here in the American South. This is just the first level of yuck. There will be more to come, but a lot of what's remaining is actually in that wax, and we're going to be removing a lot of that wax in just a minute. Let me get some dirt off the backing board too. All right, let me get a fresh piece of paper towel and get out my heat gun. I'm going to start with the backing board as it's closest to me. If you don't have a heat gun like this, you can use a hairdryer. All nice and wet. Sounds like a very different video. This thing gets ridiculously hot, much hotter than a hair dryer. So I'm really getting a good effect here. This board will pretty much be brand new with very little wax on it when I'm done. As I mentioned before in other videos, it's a perception that we're all mad scientists and it's all Doc Brown kind of stuff and flux capacitors and gigawatts. An awful lot of being a good amp tech is being a shade tree mechanic and a good janitor. Well, it's hot to the touch now. That's a good feeling. Whew. It's steamy. Look at how fast that isopropyl is evaporating off that. That's how hot the board is. All right, that's the backing board. Let's do the same thing to the main board. This will get even hotter because as I heat it up, those eyelets will maintain that heat. They'll retain it. The board's actually wanting to straighten back out as I do this. It had much more of a warp to it originally. So, partially de-waxed, still waxed. This one didn't get as thorough a waxing at the factory as many. A lot of times you do this on a 70s Fender and you end up with huge puddles of wax. You can just see it ooze down to a low spot on the board. This is relatively minor. A couple places where it's built up. Give a little bit of help as necessary. Let's do the other side. Some places where there's very stubborn flux buildup. This board's almost too hot to touch. That's good. It means it's very unlikely to have any moisture left in it when I'm done. It'll build back up, but it'll take many decades. Many decades. Remember, this amp's almost as old as I am. 75. So it's just under, 49 years old. If in 50 years from now it needs this process again, that's not too bad. Remember, people keep asking for these long videos, and I say, but aren't they boring? And people are like, no, it's fascinating. And I'm sitting here kind of bored of myself at the moment, but this boring stuff pays off in exciting results. When you play an amp and it just sounds right, and there's nothing you wish was different about it, and there's no stray mystery noises anywhere, that's when the boredom pays off. And this is not an awful lot of time to spend, even on a lowly little champ. But I have to say, doing this tells me I would have never enjoyed being a paleontologist as much as I might have thought from the movies when I was a kid. They've spent years removing excess minerals and rocks from the fossils embedded, like a few grains of sand at a time. It can take years and years to get all the stuff off that they don't want. I barely have the patience for this. I don't have the patience for that. right, that's good. I'll put that to the side. Get my solder braid, desoldering braid rather. And the no cleaner that I use is in the description of the videos, so you can find exactly what I use if you're curious. Some of these have a little bit of excess solder that stayed in place, and I found that running the braid along the top kind of cleans the area up as needed. Let's see. Most of these are already pretty good. Check from the other side. This is why I usually say, hey, here's the before, here's what I'm going to do, or here's how I do it, and here's the after, rather than showing all this stuff. I don't know, you guys seem to find it interesting, and, you know, it's realistic and all that. I hope it doesn't come across as, oh, my life is so hard, this is so difficult. I used to work concrete jobs. I've dug ditches, I've moved concrete in wheelbarrows next to a pool when it was 110 degrees outside and I could not get in that pool. I have had jobs standing my feet on concrete for 14 plus hours a day without, you know, no days off this week. Everyone's got to do overtime, no paid overtime kind of jobs. And worst of all, I've had jobs where I had to listen to some idiot in a tie. So, you know, in comparison, I've got it made with this. So this is not a pity party, but this stuff does get boring. And what I do for myself is I set myself little goals. Like if I get this far, where both boards are clean and all the old wax and flux and solder are out and it's ready to rebuild, that's where I stop and I go make a fresh pot of coffee and I enjoy the hell out of a cup of coffee. And then I resume. And that's, I just set little targets for myself throughout the workday. And I have reached one of those targets. So we will resume in a moment. All right. Fortified anew. I'm going to rebuild this. And I'm going to start with those jumper wires. Now later, I'll be trying to see if I can straighten this out using some of the methods suggested in the comments of the first video on this it wasn't on this champ. Sorry, it was on the deluxe. Anyway, one of the two most recent videos where I was talking about bus wire in general and how to straighten things. Where are my clippers? Got some good suggestions on how to get out kinks in bus wire. And I will be putting those to the test in a little bit because we're going to redo those cathode connections because the ones that are in the amp are for shit. But first, we're just going to do these. Let's get kind of started that way. Then I like to take my pliers and really get them on there. Like so. So they're really going down towards the board on either side. And I'll trim off the excess in a little bit. And I've just got the whole length of bus wire here, still bundled together. I just cut off the little sections that I need as I need them. The original, like most 70s, had the bus wire on top. The 60s amps had it on the bottom. There's not any difference electronically, but it certainly looks better to have them on the bottom, so that's what I'm going to do. So to get this really tight, I have the plier, the needle nose pointing up, and I go, in this case, to the left and down, and then to the right and down, and that really crimps them nicely. And then I've got another one to do right here. And I've got some excess. The excess allows me to get that nice tight crimp. Then I will trim it. And there's bus wire is really cheap. So as I've mentioned before, I'm not too concerned about wasting the material so much as I am getting a good mechanical connection. Now I'll trim off the excess. And yes, this goes pretty quick, as you can tell. This whole process is pretty quick. The biggest part was the cleaning, but that cleaning is about 35 minutes total. And, so half a billable hour if I'm nice. Make huge dividends on that. Make sure there's not any other jumper that I'm not remembering. Nope, that's it for the jumpers. So let's move on to that bus wire. Let's see, I want one here. I'm going to go about that long. And two more. I'll do the same length on each one. Here we get that twist from being tied up in a bag. Let me get it cut to rough length first. And a third. And there were two methods suggested for how to get those kinks out and straighten that out. One was to roll it between two flat surfaces. Some people suggested wood, some people suggested metal. I don't happen to have two large enough flat surfaces to do that. The other suggestion was to do it with one end some pliers and the other end in a drill or just twisting by hand. I'm going to try by hand first. Let's see. Or some people said if you just pull it, it straightens out. Well, that's pretty good. Not perfect. If I'm doing a longer section, maybe I try the drill. I'm tugging the hell out of that, though. It does straighten it out quite a bit. Let's try it again. So I've got some tooth pliers here, and then just grabbing it there. So I'm pulling and turning a little bit. See, yeah, that is more than good enough for rock and roll. That's better than doing it the way I was, just using my fingers and kind of doing that to get the worst bits. It still needs a little bit of help with that, but all right. Anyway, so now right there where I made that little crimp when I was grabbing each one, that's where we're going to hook over the eyelets. I'll move this out of the way so you might be able to see this better. So I've got one that goes to ground right here. To unhook that just a little bit. This is the cathode for the output tubes. And just as I did on those, I like to really get it on there. And then I've got one which goes here. I think that'll still be long enough. Maybe we'll compare it to the chest real quick. Yeah, that's still enough length. I was afraid I'd turned it too short because I forgot that this one was over here. Almost all other Fender amps have the chassis wire around the edge like this one. And then the other one is down here. Is there a fourth one or is it just a 3? I will refresh my memory just a moment. No, just the 3. All right. Let me put this yucky paper towel back. I always flip it over to the cleaner side. And I like to put a tiny little bit of solder on there just to make sure that the wires cannot move around as I'm doing other things. Not a full solder joint, just kind of tinning it to the eyelet. Tinning the eyelet and tinning the wire at the same time. All right. Now those won't come loose as I do the rest of the work, and I can trim off the excess, leaving just that little bit of mechanical hook extending over for strength. All right, now I've got a whole bunch of original resistors on here. Let's get them all measured and see if they can all be reused or if any of them are well out of spec. And again, I'm red green colorblind. Hopefully you've been seeing all this. I haven't been doing everything here. Sorry, I have not been looking up. I should be looking up. I'm red green colorblind, so the color bands, the stripes on the resistors are not always my friends. But the meter is my friend. And that, was it 60 Princeton the other that put up a couple weeks ago? This is 67.5K, so that's an input 68K. I have a resistor in the bias supply that I said was a 24K. And a couple people very nicely pointed out that it is a 22K based on the color bands that they saw. But I don't care what the color bands are. I measured it. It was 24K. 225K, so that's 220. If it's long enough, that'll get reused. It's probably a 1.5K. That's a 2.7. All right. $68K. $1.524, so that's the one for the input cathode. This looks like it might be 100K plate. Yeah, 104.9. $55.3. This is the 47 ohm, but it's up a little bit. It'll probably still be okay. What is this? 105.7, that's another 100K. And this one, 1.5. So we've got two 1.5s, two 100Ks, a 68K. These are supposed to be both be 68Ks. Let me make sure I remember what I measured on those. Sorry. I was thinking about the video as opposed to what it was on in front of me. 67.5 and 69.5. So yeah. All right, those are the input ones that are probably going to get moved to the jack. These are the plates. These are the cathodes. We got negative feedback, a 2.7K, and a 220K. So we've put the board back in place here. And just triple check where things go. All right, so these 200Ks go here and here. These two space 100Ks, not 200Ks. Trying to get the old wire a little bit straight because it was not a good install from the factory. It had a lot of excess or just bent up in the air. And A lot of times I'll get in there with just a little bit of isopropyl alcohol and clean up those leads because they get tarnished over the years. You see that little bit of yuck. And let's see if I can make them look more elegant in their new installation. It's got a little excess solder on it, let me help it out. And this one, they really cut this one close. These 70s Fenders often don't have the same care that was done in the 60s. And either or both of these could actually be faulty, though they seemed okay when I first powered up the amp. I was not hearing rushing water or sizzling bacon. That one's just barely long enough to stick in there. I can't wrap it underneath like I like. I like to get a little bit of a mechanical hook when possible. You can still remove it with the hook, but it doesn't want to come out as easily. Makes for a secure board. I'll go ahead and put some solder in that eyelet so that they don't fall out as I do the other stuff. I'll worry about pretty domes later. Now it's got a missing 100K here. Happen to have some right handy. So I'll get it to length. Let me eyeball that a little bit better. I can make that a neater fit. I do want to have a little extra length on this because this is one of the sideways connections, and as the board flexes, I don't want that to pull out. So I'll actually install that a little bit higher like that so it has a little wiggle room. So I will install that in a moment. Let's see, the two caps in the tone stack are these blue ones. And people malign these all the time and say that they're bad. They're not bad. They just coincide with mistakes that CBS started to make, so people can see that this is not the same as the Blue Ajax in the 60s amps, and they think that that's the difference. No, that's just a visual signifier that other things have changed in the circuit. These caps are usually actually quite good. But what I will do is I will heat them up a little bit. Because they have a little bit of wax buildup on them. I'll clean that off. And they'll get nice and pretty. Be all shiny like. This is purely cosmetic. But I have yet to know an owner who hasn't been happy looking inside his amp and seeing that everything is suddenly pretty where it didn't used to be. Now, I'm not overheating them, just warming up the wax on the outside so I can wipe off the worst of it. If this were to cause the capacitor value to change, something was already dreadfully wrong with that capacitor. Well, let's see. While I've got it here, let's see what the capacitors actually measure. These blue ones that people say are so bad. So the 47 nanofarad measures 49.45, well within spec, and the 100 nanofarad measures 106.1, still well within spec. All right, this is the tone stack here. They have a outer foil marking on the cap. The tone stack, you can argue the case for either side of it having the lower impedance, especially in a Fender with 250K pots. So you have, 250K-ish to ground on one side, and then 100K on the other side to the plate supply. So either one can be viewed as correct, as being lower impedance. But when in doubt, do what Leo did, which is he had the plate side, the outer foil to the B plus side, so we shall do the same thing. The only reason not to would be if there was a physical layout issue, if that made things too tight and congested down at that end. So there's one. See if I can bend those over a little bit. Just barely any room to do that. And here on this one, I'm going to do it a little bit better than that. Hopefully you're seeing all this. I have to move some stuff closer to me so I can see it. Sorry. Fun thing about having all this goddamn experience is my eyes are not what they used to be. I'm kidding. My eyes have always been terrible. Started wearing glasses in 3rd grade. You know, total Poindexters. See, I couldn't secure this other end of the 100. I gotta buy myself a little more slack on this one. So I'm gonna go a little bit less in the eyelet so I can have a little bit more to curve it around. Won't be as pretty as if I'd installed these new, because the cap leads are just, they are what they are. But the end result will be good. I put a little solder in these eyelets so they will want to stay in place. Are we still in focus? Seemingly. I'll do the same thing for this 22 nanofarad, which is stuck to this wire. All right, and this one has that 220K to ground, and that goes here, I believe. Let me just confirm that. Yeah. They really didn't give much extra room on this. Here, this thing had all this excess length, so it's up in the air. I like to put them down on the board so that the mass is better supported. Buy myself a little more slack. It's so much easier to get this right when the cap leads have not been cut yet. All right, so that's in place. And I want to put some solder in 2 spots. Some of these spots, like right here, I'm really just tinning all the stuff together. It's not really full of solder yet because I've got more stuff to come in there. I know that's in my future. Let's see, this should be the 47 ohm, which measures 55 ohms. I don't trust my color vision, so let me confirm that. Yeah, 55.4. If this thing acts up, I'll change it. If anything, this is just going to have a little less negative feedback than others. Make it a little more lively on the output. I don't think it's responsible for that lack of low end. I don't see how it could be unless there's something majorly wrong with it once current is applied. Sorry, I can't show everything. All right, so put a little bit of solder there. Damn it. A lot of flux. Clean up as I go. Just keep cleaning, just keep cleaning, cleaning. We like to, what do? We clean. Sorry, you could tell when I had kids. Let's see here. I've got 2.7K and I've got 1.5Ks. Where do they all go? So the 2.7's here and the 1.5K is here and here. So let's see here. Looking at the dreaded color bands. Oh, there's a 68K. I'm missing a resistor here. All right, there's the 270. I'm sorry, 2.7. This is the negative feedback resistor. I think I said the 47 ohm was. The 47 ohm is the little tail resistor between the cathode and ground that makes the negative feedback work. The trouble with misspeaking while doing this is I don't always hear it at the time because I know what I mean. You know, it's obvious what I mean. Duh. And then I hear it back and I'm like, why did I say that? It's harder to narrate this process while doing it than one might think. All right, and then one of the 1.5K is there. Waiting for the beep so I can get this little blob of solder off here. What's the deal with these things being either too short or having excess length? None of them are just right. They'll be much closer to just right as they leave here today. Well, they're not. The amp's not leaving today, but anyway, you know what I mean. So I have to see this one to get it where I want it to go. All right, let me give that a nice cathode bypass cap. I need two 222 microfarads. Oops, no I don't. This one doesn't get a 22, it gets a 2. I'll have to order that. I don't stock 2 microfarad axials. Glad I remembered that. I remembered the Vibrochamp used a 2, but I thought that was part of the vibrato circuit. But right here is supposed to be a 2 microfarads. So I'm just going to put some solder there for now. And I've got to order some other stuff for this anyway. I got to order the treble pot and some stuff. I'll include a 2 microfarad on that order. If you saw me soldering before the beep, it beeps when it gets to 750, but the solder flows before that. All right, so now I've got to put the 1.5K down here. Get some of this old stuff off. And I guess something I don't address often enough is I'm using this Hakko metal sponge, whatever you call it, to get excess solder and clean the tip. And every so often I will re-tin the tip, but I have found that with the Hakko FX-951, as long as I keep the tip clean like that, and then it cools off when it goes in the holder. You know, if it's got a little trigger in the holder, it tells it when it's resting. It kind of powers itself off. I don't have to tin the tip as often as I did with previous irons I've had. Not that I should and I'm lazy. It's not rewarding laziness. It's just, it stays cleaner. And I don't get that darkened solder area that requires me to then remove, you know, the old stuff and add fresh. It just has been a much easier process, including tinning less frequently. But there are lots of videos out there on how to tin your iron and why you should and how to, and I'm not going to repeat all that. I'm sure Uncle Doug's got something great on it already. I'm turning this so I can see what I'm doing and keeping the value visible. Now, been a little too late. I'll have a little bit tighter than that. I like them to visually center next to the resistor they're paired with. I will be able to adjust that a little bit as I put this in place. Tighten it down at this end first. Then I can pull a bit more at this end. That's close enough to center. This resistor is not centered. The cap pretty much is. It's just a fun thing with reusing old components. But, you know, it is a 75 champ, so might as well use the old components as long as they seem good. Yeah, add a little bit of solder as I go. And while that heats up, I got a little flux here I want to remove. I believe I've got a 250 picofarad cap, which is the missing cap in the bright circuit here. Let me check my stash real quick. Well, I've got just about every other conceivable value except 250. We got 470, got 330, got 100, 120, 47, and 10. But no 250. So I will order that. I've got to order some other stuff for this amp too, so it's not a big deal. I just thought if I had it. I'm going to go ahead and solder in here. Just enough to tend that one. Still got to put wires in there. So we're in a good spot. I'm going to replace these dropping resistors in the power supply because I don't trust those 1 watts. And I don't trust the 2 watt in the cathode bypass cap either. I'm going to change that out. So I'm going to order some parts for that. I'm going to order a 2 microfarad. I'm going to order 250 picofarad here. And again, these 68Ks are going to be moved directly to the jacks. Other than that, this is in a much better place than it was. And I can do the rest of the I could do the rest of the work with this in place in the amp. I think this video has been long enough for now. We're probably right about an hour-ish, maybe a little bit more. I'm not sure because I went and had coffee. My internal clock went off. I do time these things as far as billing, but it's a bit tricky when I'm doing a video because if I take time to do things like this and tell you about a blah, 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 I can't bill the client for that. I've got to keep myself honest and just kind of say, you know, this is how long it took me, but this is how long it would have taken if I wasn't doing a video and stopping to move a camera or checking the focus or making sure that you can see what I'm doing, et cetera, et cetera. All this stuff that makes a video take a long time, the client doesn't pay for. So, but those of you who know how this stuff works know what the client is getting as a result of all this work, which is going to be a very quiet, well-behaved, reliable amplifier. So 2 other things before I end the video. First of all, when I was taking things apart, I noticed this yellow wire was just tucked around. This is one of the secondaries, an unused secondary from the replacement output transformer. This is not the way to tape off or not tape off an unused secondary. But this is the Habor, and on the Habor, the green is the 8 ohm tap, black is common, and this yellow is a 4 ohm tap. Now, had an 8 ohm speaker. The Eminence that's in here is an 8 ohm speaker, but the original amp had a 4 ohm speaker, and so used a 4 ohm tap. And you can use either tap you want as far as what's connected to the speaker. But it had the negative feedback resistor, the 2.7, chosen for connecting to the 4 ohm tap. So it's twice as much negative feedback as was designed for. That could be a lot of our loss of low end and just general anemia. Not the only cause. I think all the bad connections throughout the amp probably helped with that. But if we were to use an 8 ohm speaker, we'd want to change that to like a 4.7K resistor, or 5K or something like that. But if we wanted to use a 4 ohm, then the 2.7K is fine. The other thing I discovered when I was cleaning up the grounds in the amp, I hadn't touched these grounds with the soldering iron yet, but I was looking at them. They just didn't seem to have much of a connection. I mean, there was solder on there, but I didn't see any place where it was attached to the chassis. And out of curiosity, I turned it by hand really hard. Started off just kind of wiggling, but you know, I could make this thing really turn. It's really just held in place by flux. They have no actual solder joint there. Now, it's kind of sort of grounded because metal is touching metal with various degrees of flux in between, but the only thing holding this in place is just the flux. So that's not going to work. I'll be cleaning this up as we go. Between having actual grounds throughout the amp and not having every change connection be tack soldered and having the correct amount of negative feedback, I expect this amp will sound a lot better soon. So until then, as always, thanks for watching.